this afternoon. Awesome. So we have organized our time together with 3 main goals in mind. One is to help you stay up to speed on the progress of the Texas Commission on Community College Finance. So you're welcome. You don't have to watch the whole commission. Also to present and discuss some key themes and takeaways from Tuesday's commission meeting. And we'll also be hoping to share some resources and opportunities so you can participate moving forward. So as a reminder, this is our 4th recap session. You can always access the recording and slides from previous recaps, and they're posted online, which Jonathan will provide a link in the chat. So guys, put your hands together because I have the pleasure to welcome today's special guest, Christy Davis, to share her perspective as a member of the Texas Community College Student Advisory Council, aka SAC. So as a reminder, the council was formed with the explicit purpose of engaging the work of the commission, and it includes 12 current and recent community college students from across Texas. So Christy is a Dallas College alumni and a current senior at UT Arlington, studying public health. She started her college education at Dallas College, studying pharmacy science before discovering public health and all that it encompasses. Her goal for joining the council is to help identify and eliminate disparities that make it difficult for vulnerable Texans to obtain post-secondary education. So she believes post-secondary education should be obtained for anyone who wishes to pursue education regardless of their sex, race, socioeconomic status. And also, Christy is a huge Harry Potter fan. So let's dive in and yeah. So, Christy, are you there?
Hi, Ruby. Thank you for the introduction.
Hey, Christy. So I have a couple questions for you. So far, what do you appreciate most about serving as a member of the Student Advisory Council?
Okay, so first of all, I just want to thank you again, Ruby, for that introduction. And also, I don't think some of the SAC knows, but I actually just graduated from UTA last month as a summa cum laude grad, so that was pretty exciting. But thank you again, Ruby, for that wonderful intro. So just to answer your question, I believe it was Bishop T.D. Jakes that said that if you can't figure out your purpose, figure out your passion. For your passion will lead you right into your purpose. And I struggled for a long time finding my purpose, but I knew that I was passionate about helping others. I knew that I enjoyed being the voice for those who could not speak up for themselves or did not have the resources to do so. So being in the Student Advisory Council has allowed me to align my passion with my purpose. In addition to that, I get to collaborate with some amazing people who are just as passionate, if not more so, about seeing the change in post-secondary education, especially as it pertains to vulnerable and underrepresented students.
Thank you, Christy. First of all, congratulations. And you have done like an amazing job. All the work you've done, amazing. And I love that your passion led you to figure out your purpose. Yeah, you've done an amazing job, and we're so glad to have you as part of the Student Advisory Council. Can you share a couple of things you learned through your participation from your peers or others?
Yes, so what I've learned so far is that although we represent different community colleges all across Texas, many of us are facing or have faced some of the same challenges within our community college district, even those who have not may not personally have faced those challenges, they know someone who has. So this just lets me know that there are some issues that are affecting Texas community colleges as a whole, and that by updating and creating new policies, we can have a positive impact on enhancing the post-secondary educational experience for students all across Texas. And I mean, like, the goal is to alleviate, the disparities across the country, and if my dreams are not too broad, globally. But the issues that we are facing at home must first be tackled before we can begin to branch out. And that is what we are attempting to do by being members of the advisory council.
Awesome, Christy. Yeah, I think it's just amazing to see how you and the members of the Student Advisory Council have collaborated so well. I mean, you guys are 12 different people from different backgrounds, institutions, and different regions across Texas, but y'all understand and like share many of the same values and goals with each other. So, what have been your top takeaways or observations about community college finance or the commission's work so far? And what do you most hope they'll address in the recommendations?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that. So I am a non-traditional student, so I have graduated from both a community college and a four-year university, both based in Texas. So I have witnessed some things with finances between both institutions. I've noticed that the amount of funding allocated towards the community colleges are a bit different from what they are with four-year colleges. During the Missed Connection Summit, I don't know if anyone was able to attend, we as the advisory council were able to address some of the issues that community colleges face with financing. So I was able to discuss some of the discrepancies, like I said, between two-year and four-year colleges. Also, during this discussion, I pointed out that funds allocated towards four-year colleges are about 10 times more than that of two-year or junior colleges. So while Texas grant program is allocating about, I believe it was $430 million to four-year institutions, two-year colleges are only allocated about 44 million by the Texas Educational Opportunity Grants. And so we even talked about how funding can differ depending on zip codes. So where a student lives in Texas highly influences their educational opportunities, and by default affects them being able to contribute to the workforce that is used to sustain Texas's economy. So what is not often discussed about school-related fees is that tuition is not the only cost a student will accrue while attending school. There's other expenses such as books, there's housing, food, childcare if you have children, and other miscellaneous fees such as technology fees, which I have yet to understand what that is. So my hope is that the commission can address some of these discrepancies in funding between zip codes, and also the ones between four-year and two-year institutions.
Yeah, Christy, I definitely think that we're in an era where it's very common to see these non-traditional students. So I'm glad the commission is actively listening to the wants and needs of today's students, such as yourself. Because how could we create opportunities, right, for future generations when, I mean, we can't support the needs, if we can't support the needs of today's students. So outside of funding, what do you think community colleges can do to create more equitable access and success for vulnerable or marginalized students?
So I don't want to say I'm a pro at this, but this is my area of expertise, especially as it deals with marginalized students. So I am a big advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the focus on DEI and faculty has the ability to impact the college experiences of the student body. So by promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion on college campuses, it helps to improve student communication. It can help to reduce biases. It improves cultural competency, and it also helps prepare us, the students, for the workplace. So I know that for any institution to improve its DEI efforts, it must first begin within the institution. So how can the institutions, kind of address these efforts? We have to have, or they have to have those difficult talks. Inclusive efforts are often rooted in biases and discrimination. So sometimes it's a difficult conversation to have for both the sender and the receiver of the conversation. But this can be mitigated, by establishing some guidelines and also, encouraging different points of views. And then it may also benefit the institution to have a regular review of current policies to ensure that they are practicing current inclusion processes and are following current guidelines. So with regular reviewing of the DEI policies, it helps to make certain that the institution's regulations reflect its current processes and their current procedures.
Great. Once again, thank you, Christy, for sharing your insight today. And as this combo shows, the need for student voices is very critical, and feedback from students create possibilities for the new future of Texas. So it's important that we're having these discussions. So I will now pass it on the mic to Stephanie, who will be discussing highlights.
Thank you, Ruby. So the whole reason why we are here together today is because the commission reconvened again, this time this past Tuesday, following their last public meeting back on April 6th. Since April, the commission members have continued to meet in their 3 different work groups. So as a reminder, that's operations, workforce education, and student supports. And prior to the meeting, Chairman Woody Hunt also issued a draft of key principles for the commission to consider. And some of those principles that he outlined included the idea that funding should be based on outcomes. So elevate the outcomes portion of funding and promote improvement by each college. The idea that we should bolster workforce development and promote credentials of value to individuals and that are aligned with regional workforce needs, really in alignment and to support our state's new attainment goals, building talent, strong Texas. Ensuring access to educational opportunities and to encourage cross-institutional collaboration in the delivery of programs, including shared academic and workforce education programs. And finally, affordability should be a high priority, and a new funding model should recognize variations in cost of supporting students from diverse backgrounds. So there's been discussions around adding weights for certain populations of students to support them through the process, as well as adding weights to the outcomes portion of the funding model to reward getting those students across the finish line. So Tuesday's meeting opened with invited testimony from the Higher Education Coordinating Board's Commissioner Harrison Keller. He tends to open up the meetings, as well as Dennis Jones from NCHEMS, who, if you guys have been following the commission meetings since they started meeting back in November of last year, Dennis is going to be a familiar face to you. And this testimony was followed by updates from each of the work group leads on what they've been doing in the interim since the April meeting. All of this was then followed by invited testimony from a workforce panel, a presentation of the Texas Association of Community Colleges recommendations, which were released on Tuesday. So it's kind of breaking news. A student panel, which included Christy, and the entire panel basically crushed it. And then finally, research updates from Dr. Lori Taylor, who we've also seen before. She came in to share some updates on that research project that they've been commissioned to execute. As always, you can view the posted agenda and watch the full archive video at any time. And I'm hoping that someone will drop those links in the chat. But here we've done our best to pick out the most important highlights and themes to basically, as Ruby said, keep you from having to watch the full commission meeting, and also to spur discussion around what's going on. So as always, we'll start with some highlights from the meeting. So as highlight number one, we figured it would be good to dive into Dennis Jones's testimony, Dennis Jones from NCHEMS. He came into, he's presented at commission meetings before. He's been attending the work group meetings. And he returned to outline a set of basic design principles for the commission members to start keeping in mind as they begin drafting recommendations, which they will do between now and the next time they meet in September. So some of these design principles to keep in mind, and here we have a chart of the variation of the tuition and fees charged at the community, across the community college districts. You can see just how much variation there is in what students have to pay in district and out of district. There really is just, it basically comes down to what zip code you're in, depends on how much you're going to pay. But some of these design principles that Dennis outlined include the consideration that because community colleges are locally governed institutions, local funding should provide the funding required for base operations rather than the state carrying that burden. The state should, quote unquote, pay for attainment and workforce outcomes. So the state should indicate what it is that they want to get for their money. And regardless of how the college produces them, with additional weights for high priority credentials and populations, similar to what I mentioned in alignment with Chairman Hunt's principles as well. And finally, another key principle that he outlined is that the state should promote affordability for students, particularly those paying out of district tuition, specifically by identifying alternative funding sources and providing additional student financial aid or facilitating shared services and passing on those savings that they get from those shared services to students. So with this, we want to put up a poll question for you guys. Get your thoughts and start a conversation going around this. So Dennis, kind of dove into the question around who bears the responsibility for funding community colleges, and posed this to the commission members as a serious question that they really need to think through as they devise their recommendations and think through a revised funding model for community colleges in the state of Texas. So in your opinion, who do you think bears the largest responsibility for funding community colleges? Does the state government bear that responsibility? Should the local government shoulder the brunt of that responsibility? Should students who attend these community college be the primary sources of funding for community college via the tuition fees that they pay in? Or D, some other option? And if you choose other, we can call on you to clarify what you mean. So from your perspective, who should be the primary funding source for community colleges across the state of Texas?
We've got responses coming in. I think we've got about half of our participants who've logged an answer. So if you want to give them a countdown, I will end it whenever you want, and I can share the results.
All right, we can give folks 5 more seconds. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I feel like a rocket should be exploding at this point.
All right, here you go. Can you see them?
Oh, state government. Okay. So you guys disagree with Dennis that the local government should shoulder that burden. So for any of you guys who said state government, do you want to chime in and let us know why you think the state bears the biggest responsibility for funding community colleges, even though community colleges are primarily locally governed institutions in our state? Don't be shy. We're a friendly crowd.
Because I would say, because when they were established, they said they were going to, state said they were going to fund them. And rather than funding them at higher levels, they've continuously reduced the level of funding.
So Alicia is right. The state has over time reduced has reduced as a proportion of overall community college funding. I think in the 80s they constituted 2/3 of community colleges' overall budget, and then now they're less than a quarter. So it has gone down. Meanwhile, local taxes and tuition and fees have increased as a proportion of funding. Charles chimed in, because post-secondary education is a right that shouldn't be left to individual communities. Which I think most of us can get behind that. I think we're all on the same page with that. I'm curious for the folks who chose local. It's probably one or two of you guys. I'm curious what prompted you to go with local government. There was one who said other. So whoever the other person is, I really want to know what your answer is.
I'm happy to chime in as other. Can you all hear me and see me?
Yeah.
Hi. I chimed in as other because I think it's not any one entity's responsibility. I think it's a combination of all, because there's the state funding aspect. I think there's also other state accountability measures that are being asked of institutions that really should also come with additional funding to support it, and shouldn't just come solely from the local communities, whereas the local communities may have decided otherwise, or would, may put their money somewhere else, right? So there's also that. So I think it's a combination between state and local communities to work together, because they both have a vested interest in what's happening to the student, to outcome for that, whether that's an improvement to the regional community and economic base, or fulfilling a need that the state requirements are having. So I think it's a combination of both and shouldn't be ignored. I was also going to add that I also was curious if this is still true, that we are, as community colleges, still considered Texas political subdivisions of higher education. So that, to me, still kind of holds value to the need to have that state, the state funding sources as well. So that's why I put other.
Great, thank you, Catherine. So we've got a couple of coordinating board folks online, so maybe they can chime in and answer your question if they know. As far as I know, the answer to your question is yes, but maybe the coordinating board folks can clarify or correct me if I'm incorrect. But I think you bring up an interesting point, Catherine. Community college funding in Texas is often referred to as the three-legged stool, where the primary sources of funding come from the state, local taxes, and students through tuition and fees. There's no guarantee that the legs of the stool will be equal in length. So the stool will be a little wobbly as it is. It'll sort of shift over time. But I think you have a point in calling out that it is a shared responsibility. And the question is still sort of up in the air, who bears the primary brunt of that responsibility. Jonathan, do we have time to hear from the person who said local, if they're willing to chime in, or do we need to move on to highlight number 2?
No, let's round it out.
Okay, all right. So if you chose local, we'd love to hear your thoughts on why you chose that answer.
I didn't answer, but I'll go ahead and just maybe make a little bit of the case for local responsibility, which I think if those who've attended previous sessions like this, and I was surprised that there was a fair amount of discussion about this at the commission hearing, I think in response to kind of Dennis's presentation, which is just confronting the fact that we don't have really the full local investment in our community college system because of the mismatch between service areas and taxing districts. So regardless of what the right mix of the shared responsibility should be, it does seem to be that there's some tension here between additional state investment, even though I would, even though we've been seeing the downward trend, and kind of the opt-out nature of so much property wealth in the state that doesn't currently contribute at a local level. So when we talk about how to introduce additional state dollars, is the role, I think the question I would ask is the role of the state to subsidize local communities that aren't currently paying in to the system? And I think that's where some of the tension about shared responsibility may be coming from.
And that is a massive question, Jonathan, that I don't think will get resolved in the short term, but I think is part of a long-term set of goals for the advocacy community.
Hey, Stephanie, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, this is Amy over at the coordinating board. And I was dealing with something that popped up. So I missed a specific question before from one of the students, but another like random thing that I think about on this note about the local responsibility, I think another thing to consider is also the degree to which the local community utilizes the community college as for things beyond actual education, right? Like to the extent that it's like a community center or serve some other purpose, I think is another argument for some local responsibility in that regard. Now, again, and that is totally going to change college to college. But it's just something to keep in mind. In my dream world, like the community college is a community center, but I don't know how often that is actually the case.
And that's a really important point, Amy. I mean, most of these community colleges, when they first emerged, were built specifically for their local communities to which they belong, and many of them grew out of the high schools, were created alongside the high school. So they are hyper local institutions devised to serve their specific communities without really, at least initially, a thought to a sort of statewide system. You know, when you look at how community colleges emerged across the country, not just in Texas, that is how they emerged, just as hyperlocal institutions. And the idea that the state comes in and that has any sort of oversight or bears any sort of responsibility is relatively newish in the history of community colleges. And so they are actual, like the name is perfect for them. They are community colleges, and they do serve the community in so many ways beyond just academically. And so I think that's an interesting point to bring up about how they serve their communities in such varied ways, because each community is so varied.
And what was the question that was asked? And I'll hopefully might be able to answer.
I think it was, I'm gonna ask, I can't remember who it was that asked, but if we could do that in the chat, just so we can keep moving, because I think it was a technical question. I think we can answer it in the chat.
Let me know.
If you don't mind. Thank you, Amy. I'm really glad that you're with us. And I also wanted to round this out by noting Christina's comment in the chat, if you didn't see it, which is we talk about local responsibility, understanding, as I think, Dennis and others were pointing out, that, and as we know in our K-12 system too, right, that local resource, local property value, et cetera, is differential, right? So even if they are local institutions, they are not necessarily equally able to provide local resource for them. So let's move to the work group considerations. And so, I think this is a good pivot from some high level questions to now, like, based on where the work groups are and where they are basically is that they have continued to meet really intensively outside of the public meetings. And what they did at this last meeting was kind of share out what were labeled considerations. So to be clear, these are not a full set of formal recommendations. This is more a readout on kind of some of the key themes and areas that they are most heavily exploring, and I think trying to potentially solve for in their forthcoming recommendations. And we'll talk about, as we close out today's session, what comes next and when we will expect to see more of that pen to paper. So each work group delivered a set of considerations that I'll put up on the screen so that you can see them in full. But rather than pour over those, what I thought I would do, and this is again editorializing a little bit, but the things that I saw across the work group considerations, and there are a fair number of these issues that are popping up across workforce, college operations, and student supports. And so these I just wanted to share out, and would welcome others who maybe feel like I've missed something, and we'll have another poll question in just a second. But number one, I think there seems to be a developing consensus or kind of momentum around really taking a fresh look at the success points, the outcomes-based funding, and modifying those in ways that will deliver both increased and more consistent funding. That again, in line with the key principles that were talked about earlier, that both reflect varying student needs and local or regional and statewide workforce needs. So that would be one key thing that I think is kind of emerged. The second here is the fact that the formula, as it's currently constructed, doesn't necessarily reward or fund all the different pathways to credentials that may be happening within a community college. An easy example is maybe credit versus non-credit. There's been, and I think TAC addresses this in some of their recommendations, but some of the lack of attention or funding tied to continuing education, CTE, et cetera. And so, finding a way to reward all of the credentials, regardless of how they may be produced. And I think there's also, I think it was maybe I can't remember, I don't want to misstate the state. I think maybe it's North Carolina, Stephanie can correct me if I'm wrong, but really tiering the value of those credentials based on, I think, a to be determined calculation of the return to the student in terms of their employment and earnings. So I think that, looking holistically at the broad variety of services that are provided to students is certainly one theme as well that I think is starting to come up. The third, and this is where there isn't, I would say, a whole lot of specificity, just an acknowledgement that there's a problem or an issue around how do we address the inconsistency when it comes to dual credit access, equity, and perhaps quality or standardization across the state. But I do think that dual credit is certainly risen to the top as well. And then the fourth thing I've put on here is really this concept, right, of encouraging or incentivizing, not mandating, the coordination of some shared services that expand educational and workforce opportunities for students. I think it was maybe mentioned by Dennis, this also potentially being one of many vehicles to help reduce the cost burden for students as well. So we'll pause there. I will also give you the view so you can see what was actually on the slides that were presented from each of the work groups in terms of the full set of quote unquote considerations. And then I want to go ahead and like we just did, put forward another poll just to get us thinking and talking. So the question is, which of those areas that I kind of foregrounded just a second ago, A, B, C, or D, do you think are most important for the commission to pursue? And I'd ask you to really put your student focused hat on, and you may think it's all of the above, so that's fair, but if you had to choose one, what do you think is most important to pursue to really support student success? And I see a bunch of people starting to jump in, so take your time. I know it's a tough choice, but it's really just to get us talking. We've got about a third of our participants who've answered, so don't be shy. I can't see who says what. All right. Do 5, 4, 3. Cast your vote. Oh, that got it. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and we got about 2/3. So that's pretty good. Here is what y'all said. And of course, I'm going to ask you to chime in. And we can open the conversation up to a wider aperture in just a second. But it looks like close to 40, the most heavily response was around the student success points, followed by kind of dual credit as a distant second, and then a close third there was the shared services, and then fourth is kind of this concept of all credentials tiered by value. So would love folks who feel comfortable, who want to come off mute, share kind of why you selected what you selected, or get in the chat and talk about, kind of why you selected what you did. And then we can also kind of discuss some other questions there if it brings up some other points about just reactions to some of these considerations. But who wants to jump in? Either on what they thought was most important or just other reactions to the considerations you're seeing. Who wants some? There are a bunch of you said the success points, revisiting those. So somebody, why? How's that going to make an impact for students? Am I going to have to put Christina on the spot? Christina, I know in your testimony, which we'll get to in just a minute, that's our third highlight. You talked about a few things, but I know one of the things you talked about was really aligning the incentives of community colleges to the success of students. So from a student perspective, I don't know if there's anything you want to share. And I don't know if you put that as your answer just now, but would welcome your perspective.
I actually did. I think the importance of student success points is something that we would like to get to, but I think a more present matter is incentivizing the coordination of shared services to expand educational and workforce opportunities for students, because as I experienced it firsthand, I think there's a lot of willing, there's a lot of yearn for students to get out into the industry that they studied for. However, when they're actually graduating from or they're getting their certificate, or they're graduating with their associates, when they're actually getting into the field that they studied for, they're finding it a lot harder to actually find a job in that field.
Okay. So when you say, what do you think of when you hear shared services?
I think of universities partnering with community colleges to provide those opportunities.
Gotcha.
Whether it be via internship, externship, something, just to give students those, like I said, the resume building skills, the basic skills, just to get out there to be successful in their field of study.
Gotcha. Okay. That's helpful. I don't know that everybody always understands shared services in the same way. And I think that there's still a lot of questions, honestly, about what falls under that. So I would invite others to maybe build on Christina's comment. If there's a different definition or different kinds of services that you're hearing or that you think are in the scope of what the commission's talking about, would love to hear others, kind of add to Christina's comment.
So this is Sue. When I think of shared services, I think more of like back office operations and types of things where rather than everybody trying to buy the same things, everybody trying to do the same things in an operational capacity, where you could leverage through member services and that sort of thing. When I think about the K through 12 environment, I think about some of the work that's going on in the rural areas, like collegiate education and the services that shared services that they're doing for K through 12 in the rural school districts. So I guess I'm thinking of it more from an operational standpoint. I'm not sure how the commission is defining it.
Got it. Got it. I don't know if others are on who want to chime in. I thought I saw Jacob maybe from TAC join. I believe this is mentioned in some way in the recommendations that y'all put forward. So you don't have to come off or share, but I just wanted to note and invite you to share if there's, if you want to share kind of what those conversations are looking like within the members.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, those last comments were sort of more reflective of where those conversations had started, just in terms of back office, sort of economies of scale, ways to form these partnerships. And I think that there is a need there, particularly when you get into some of the smaller or rural schools that don't have the resources or staffing to engage in those kind of like detailed, lengthy discussions with partners about like what platform or system or contract terms, would be best. So I think there's a desire to like harness any of those efficiencies, but kind of that initial obstacle of doing that landscape analysis of what those opportunities actually are over what timeline, what kind of returns, it kind of ended up getting bogged down really in a lot of the technical stuff, and the discussions, particularly with some of the CEOs and faculty with the colleges, they're much more inclined to think in terms of education, which is what they mostly do. So the bill as originally written specified that the commission had to, as one of the few shalls in there, that they had to address shared services. But prior to my time with TAC, I guess it was a little bit more contentious in terms of, what that would look like. So they specifically say it doesn't have to include academic. I mean, it doesn't prohibit it, but a lot of the attention has turned towards then those first comments about, all right, are there sort of more equitable or efficient ways to partner on the academic side, which I think initially had made people a little bit nervous. But as the discussions kind of continued, it makes a lot of sense as well.
Well, thank you, Jacob. I mean, I certainly think in just kind of circling back to Christina's comments, as much as that shared service can ultimately return benefit and value to student opportunities, is certainly promising. So we will continue to track that, of course, but we always try to capture a lot on these calls. And to present our final highlight from Tuesday's meeting, I want to welcome, you've already met her a little bit, another member of the Student Advisory Council, Christina Navarro, to join us. Christina also serves as the president of the SGA and the Culinary Arts Club at El Paso Community College. She has an associate's degree in culinary arts, a certificate in pastry arts, and is currently enrolled for an associate's in small business management as well. Firm believer that we never stop learning, whether it's in school or through life experience, as we're all doing today. So Christina, I will pass it to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon. Tuesday also included the first opportunity for students like myself to directly participate in the commission's public meetings. Alongside 3 other members of the Student Advisory Council, I had the honor of testifying and briefly sharing my story as a non-traditional student. Since we don't have the time today to watch each of our remarks, on the screen are short quotes from each of the fellow council members who testified on the importance of state investment, workforce education, and student support services. I encourage you all to make the time to listen to each of their testimonies. But for now, here's a recording of my testimony.
Thanks, Christina. And while there's Isabel actually just jumping in, so we'll welcome Isabel. You can see her quote there. She talked a lot about the importance of student support services and her experience as a parenting student. Victoria, as you can see, talked a lot about workforce education. And again, you'll see maybe some overlap there with some of those issues related to the variety of credentials and pathways for students. And then Christy, who you met earlier, you heard some of her comments earlier, and then Christina herself. But of course, you're going to get to hear in just a second Christina's full testimony. So bear with me as I stop sharing this screen and instead share with you her testimony. All right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Hunt and honorable members of the commission. My name is Christina Navarro, a recent El Paso Community College graduate, a recent continuing education student, and a incoming accounting, business, and economics student. Workforce education students are an integral part of the community college system. When they succeed, so does the surrounding community. These are students who chose a non-traditional college experience to catapult themselves into the workforce and to begin contributing economically, socially, and industrially. I am asking for your support in the form of state funding to contribute to their successes. I am a first-generation college student and graduate, former Student Government Association president, military wife, mother, and a chef. Finances for a college student are always a struggle, but even more so for parents like myself who are pursuing a degree to better provide for their families. As a student who was working and going to school full-time, I have experienced many sleepless nights of self-doubt and many days of trying to stretch the minutes to complete my homework, to be to work on time, and to attend my classes. I was up at 5 a.m. to double check my homework and make sure that I was ready for class. I was out the door by 7:15 to be at work on time, clock out at 2 o'clock p.m., and then go straight to class until 8 p.m. I went to work, I did my homework, and I repeated the next day. I did not have to leave the building to drive to work, so I was able to gain work experience, build my resume, complete my hours, and still get to class on time. I was employed by the college through a work-study program, and while I was beyond grateful to have had the opportunity, the pay is nowhere near a livable wage. It is important to understand the value that work-study positions bring to the college, and in return, how those positions impact the students. Along with the financial aid and scholarship, degree-specific stipend programs such as work-study allow students like myself to earn a paycheck at times that work around my class schedule, while gaining valuable industry-related experience. My work-study experience gave me the confidence that I could succeed in my chosen career path. I think of my peers who did not have the same opportunities. I filled one of only 2 work-study positions in a program of about 300 students. That means 298 students were not getting the work-based experience and resume building skills that I was receiving. If there were partnerships in place within our local community that provided similar opportunities, more students would be able to see their goals come to fruition. State investment and work-study partnerships would benefit students who never thought that they could get that far, and employers would see an uptick in hireable candidates. In addition, funding that inspires community colleges to promote and track student success would be beneficial for both the student and the institution. If the institution receives funding in correlation with their success rates, students would be at the receiving end of support and encouragement towards their career goals. It would help to create a positive environment where students know that they will succeed and they will go into the workforce to strengthen the community. Furthermore, state funding could go as far as the creation of partnerships with universities as well as employers to further reinforce student success. If a student decided that they would like to pursue a higher education degree, they could do that. If a student decided that they wanted to advance their career through the workforce program and their employer, they could do that. These partnerships are a lifeline to students who opt for the non-traditional education for various reasons. My personal story is one of vigor, determination, and effort, and it is the reason that I am here today. I experienced the hardships of being a workforce student firsthand, and I know that the support of my state would have made a difference.
Thank you very much. Are we going to hear from Isabel?
Yes, can you hear?
Oops,
Yeah.
sorry, y'all.
Can you hear me, Jonathan? Yes. Oh, okay.
Technical difficulties. Sorry about that. I wanted to take the last minute or two if anybody has questions, since we have Christina with us as well as Christy and Isabel, not to put her on the spot, but a few members of our Student Advisory Council. who are with us, if they have any questions, if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask of students about their experience or insights or input as you're considering your engagement with the commission, wanted to at least make a minute or two for folks to ask a question of the student members. Well, I'll ask, what was, and this isn't about policy or anything like that, but I wonder, Isabel or Christy or Christina, what was the experience like of testifying? Had you done that before? And what did you get from the commission's response? We didn't play that, but I know that they did respond a little bit to your comments with the limited time they had. So that's for anybody from our council who wants to say a few things.
I'll start us off. Well, for me, that was my first time testifying. So it was a new experience in its own, and I had to make sure my mic was working at the beginning. But I felt that honestly, after I gave my testimony, that it was mine, as a working parent who is also going to school. I think they kind of forgot that that a large portion of our students are parents that are also raising kids, and also it's not just the traditional student that they're also affecting. And for most working parents, for us to further our education, community colleges will hopefully be in our affordability.
Thanks, Isabel. I definitely think they got that message. I think a lot of the comments I recall was kind of thank you for lifting up kind of this population of students and hearing those stories. So yeah, you did an awesome job. I know we're limited on time, so I'm going to move us and pass it back to, I think, to Ruby. And I'm going to share my screen once again. So we're going to close out with what to expect next with the commission and some additional resources and information.
Thank you, Jonathan. Once again, thank you to all the SEC members that participated in the testimonies. Yeah, so let's talk about a couple next steps. So like Jonathan said, the commission will now return to work groups in July and August to draft and format those recommendations. So a workshop meeting where all the members was proposed towards the end of August. Also, they plan to approve recommendations when they meet on September 12th before presenting and reporting a formal report on October 18th. So they're still determining public comments and windows and opportunities. Yeah, and if we go to the next slide, here are a couple of announcements and events and resources. So the E3 Alliance researched high school pathways that are associated with post-secondary success, and they'll be releasing that on June 28th. So check those out.
I know Jennifer's on and I have the link, but I can't do two things at once. So Jennifer, if you want to drop that registration link in, we'll send all this out, but it probably won't get to y'all may not get to y'all in time for your event on the 28th. But I just wanted to share that if we want to get that in the chat. But I'm sorry to interrupt. Keep going, Ruby.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that. Also, the Community College Association of Texas Trustees Trustee Conference resources there, and it includes the Texas Commission of Community College Finance presentations from Representative Van Deeper that will be also shared to you. There's also a reinstatement Pell for incarcerated students recording that we had that includes Donna Zunica from Lee College. I don't want to butcher her name, but yeah. So if you'd like to receive some updates from the Commit Partnership on the Texas Commission on Community College Finance, you can also subscribe that will also be shared with you. And finally, Young Invincibles did release a wide-ranging report on women and parents in the workforce that are building a path to apprenticeships. So check those out. And thank you everybody for taking your time and joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.